The old Valkyrie sat in his chair and watched the young historian prepare the recording device. His name was Kethral, and he had lived for 162 cycles. His body carried the marks of war. 3 of his 4 eyes had turned cloudy with age. Deep scars crossed his chest where human weapons had burned through his natural armor. His left arm ended at the elbow, lost to a grenade thrown by a farmer's daughter on a world called New Montana. The young historian's name was Scythe, and she had never seen war. She had grown up in an era of peace, when humans and Valkyrie traded goods and shared knowledge. She could not imagine a time when these 2 species had tried to destroy each other. "I want to understand," Scythe said as she adjusted the recorder. "The old texts speak of humans as if they were monsters. But the humans I've met seem kind. They laugh easily. They share their food. How can both things be true?" Kethral made a sound that might have been a laugh. It came out as a dry rattle from his damaged throat. "Sit down," he said. "I will tell you about humans. And when I am finished, you will understand why I still wake in the night, shaking with fear, even after all these years." "Scythe?" The recorder hummed softly. Kethral closed his eyes and let the memories come. They were never far away. The Valkyrie Dominion had ruled 47 star systems when they first detected human signals. The signals came from a small yellow star on the edge of explored space. Valkyrie scientists studied these signals for 3 cycles and learned much about the species that sent them. Humans were soft creatures. They had no natural armor, no venom, no claws worth mentioning. They lived short lives, rarely exceeding 100 cycles. Their world was small and wet, and they had only recently learned to travel between stars. The High Council reviewed the data and made their decision. Humanity would be conquered. Their worlds would become part of the Dominion. Their people would serve Valkyrie interests. This was the natural order of things. The strong ruled the weak. Kethral was young then, barely 40 cycles old. He served as a squad leader in the 3rd Assault Legion. When his commander told him they would be invading a human colony world, he felt only excitement. This would be easy glory. The humans were primitives. They would fall quickly. The fleet arrived at New Montana on what humans called a Tuesday morning. Kethral remembered looking down at the planet from his transport ship. It was a beautiful world, with vast forests and mountain ranges that reminded him of home. Small settlements dotted the landscape. Smoke rose from chimneys. Children played in fields. The fleet commander sent the standard surrender demand. All species received the same message: submit or be destroyed. Most species submitted. The Valkyrie had never met a species that chose destruction. The response came within the hour. It was a video message from the planetary governor, a human woman named Katie Morrison. She had gray hair and lines on her face that spoke of age and worry. But her eyes were steady, and her voice did not shake. "I have received your demand," she said. "I have shared it with my people. We have discussed it carefully, and we have decided that you are welcome to land on our world. But I must warn you of something." She leaned closer to the camera. "You will not be welcome to stay. Every man, woman, and child on this planet will fight you. We will fight you in the cities and in the forests. We will fight you in the mountains and in the valleys. We will fight you until you leave or until we are all dead. There is no third option." She smiled then, and Kethral would never forget that smile. It was not the smile of someone who feared death. It was the smile of someone who had already made peace with it. "Good luck," Katie Morrison said. "You're going to need it." The message ended. The fleet commander laughed. His officers laughed. Kethral laughed too. What else could they do? This small woman with her gray hair and her lined face had just threatened the mightiest military force in the galaxy. It was absurd. It was amusing. It was the last time Kethro would laugh for 3 years. The invasion began at dawn. The next day, plasma artillery reduced the main settlement to burning rubble within hours. Valkyrie ground forces landed in perfect formation, their armor gleaming in the morning sun. Kethro led his squad through streets filled with smoke and ash. They encountered no resistance. The humans had fled. "Cowards," one of his soldiers said. "They talk bravely but run when real warriors arrive." Kethro said nothing. Something felt wrong. The settlement was too empty. The humans had not simply fled in panic. They had taken everything useful: food, medicine, tools, weapons. This was not the chaos of retreat. This was the order of strategy. The first attack came at sunset. Kethrol's squad had made camp in a clearing at the edge of the forest. They were cooking their evening meal and joking about how quickly the campaign would end. Then the trees exploded with gunfire. Humans emerged from shadows that should not have hidden them. They wore no uniforms, carried no standard weapons. A man in farmer's clothes shot 3 Valkyrie with a hunting rifle before anyone could react. A woman threw a bottle filled with burning liquid that stuck to armor and would not stop burning. A boy who could not have been more than 15 cycles old ran at a Valkyrie officer with a knife and died with the blade buried in his enemy's throat. The attack lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, 11 of Kethrol's 30 soldiers were dead. The humans vanished back into the forest, taking their wounded with them. They left nothing behind but shell casings and blood. Kethrol stood in the clearing and looked at the bodies of his soldiers. He thought about Katie Morrison's smile. He thought about her promise that every man, woman, and child would fight. She had not been boasting. "What do we do now?" one of his surviving soldiers asked. Kethrol stared into the dark forest. Something was watching from the shadows. He could feel it. The humans had not fled. They had not surrendered. They had simply changed the rules of the game. "We report to command," Kethrol said. "And we tell them the truth. We are not fighting an army. We are fighting a planet. Every creature on this world is our enemy. And they are not afraid of us." He paused. "They should be, but they are not. And that terrifies me more than anything I have ever faced." The long war for New Montana had begun, and the Valkyrie had already lost something far more important than soldiers. They had lost the certainty that they would win. Scythe leaned forward in her chair. The recorder continued its quiet humming, capturing every word the old veteran spoke. Outside the sanctuary windows, the twin suns of the Valkyrie homeworld were setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. But neither of them noticed. They were lost in memories of a war fought long ago and far away. "You have told me how humans fight," Scythe said, "but I want to understand how they think. What makes them the way they are?" Kethrol was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "That question almost broke my mind," he admitted. "Humans are a contradiction that should not exist. They are capable of such cruelty, such violence, such destruction. And yet they are also capable of kindness that defies all logic. I have seen both, and I still cannot reconcile them." He began to tell her about the day he was captured. It happened in the 2nd year of the war. Kethrol and a small patrol had been ambushed in a forest valley. Most of his soldiers were killed instantly. He took a bullet in his leg and collapsed against a tree, unable to move. The humans approached carefully, their weapons raised. Kethrol expected death. He had killed many of their people. He had burned their homes and destroyed their farms. He was certain they would take revenge. Instead, a man knelt beside him and began examining his wound. The man's name was Sam Ellis. He was perhaps 30 cycles old by human standards, with brown hair and a face that showed signs of exhaustion. He wore no uniform, just simple civilian clothes stained with dirt and blood. but his hands were steady as he pulled medical supplies from a small bag. "This is going to hurt," Sam said. "Try not to scream. We're still in enemy territory." Catherall stared at him in confusion. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. "I am your enemy. I have killed your people." Sam did not look up from his work. He cleaned the wound with something that burned like fire, then began wrapping it with bandages. "You're hurt," he said simply. "I'm a medic. This is what I do. But I'm Valkyrie. I can see that. You should kill me." Sam finally looked up. His eyes were tired but calm. "Maybe I should," he admitted. "I've lost friends to your kind. Good people. People who never wanted this war. Sometimes, late at night, I think about revenge. I think about all the things I could do to make you suffer the way we've suffered." He finished wrapping the bandage and sat back. "But that's not who I am. That's not who we are. At least, that's not who I want us to be." Catherall did not understand. He said, "So." Sam laughed softly. It was not a cruel laugh. "Neither do I, some days. But my mother used to say something when I was young. She said that how we treat our enemies says more about us than how we treat our friends. If I torture you, I become a monster. If I kill you when you're helpless, I lose something I can never get back." He stood and gathered his supplies. "You're a prisoner now. You'll be treated fairly, fed, given medical care. And when this war ends, you'll probably go home." Catherall spent 6 months as a human prisoner. He was never tortured. He was never abused. The humans gave him food from their own supplies, even when supplies were short. They treated his injuries as carefully as they treated their own wounded. He watched them closely during those months, trying to understand. He saw a commander named Patrick Dunn, who had lost his entire family in the initial bombardment. His wife, his children, his parents, all dead. The Valkyrie general responsible for the attack was eventually captured in a raid. Catherall expected Patrick to demand execution. Blood for blood. It was what any Valkyrie would do. Instead, Patrick visited the general in his cell. He stood there for a long time, saying nothing. The general waited for the killing blow. "You murdered my family," Patrick finally said. His voice was steady, but Catherall could hear the pain underneath. "My daughter was 7 years old. She liked to draw pictures of horses. She wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up." He paused. "I want to kill you. Every part of me wants to kill you. I dream about it. I imagine it. Some nights, it's the only thing that keeps me going." The general said nothing. Patrick took a deep breath. "But you're going to stand trial. You're going to face justice. Real justice, not revenge. Because that's who we are. That's what separates us from monsters." He turned and walked away. The general was tried 3 months later. He was found guilty of war crimes and sentenced to life imprisonment. He was not executed. He was not tortured. He lived another 30 years, writing his memoirs and eventually expressing regret for his actions. Catherall attended that trial. He watched Patrick Dunn sit quietly in the audience as the verdict was read. He saw no satisfaction on the human's face, only exhaustion and perhaps a small measure of peace. "I still do not understand," Catherall told Scythe. "A Valkyrie who lost his family would demand blood. He would torture the killer. He would make him suffer as his family suffered. This is justice in our culture. This is balance." He shook his head. But humans have a different idea of justice. They believe in something they call the rule of law. They believe that even their enemies deserve certain basic rights. They believe that how you treat the helpless reflects your character. Scythe was quiet for a moment. "That sounds like weakness," she said. Catherall's clouded eyes focused on her with sudden intensity. "That is what I thought too. I was wrong." He leaned forward. "It takes no strength to kill a helpless enemy. Any coward can do that. It takes true strength to show mercy when every instinct screams for blood. It takes courage to hold to principles when abandoning them would be easier. He settled back in his chair. The humans could have become monsters. The things we did to them, the families we destroyed, the children we killed. They had every reason to abandon their principles and embrace pure hatred. Some of them did. I will not pretend otherwise. He paused. But most of them did not. Most of them held on to their humanity, if you will forgive the expression. They fought us with everything they had, but they refused to become us. They refused to let the war turn them into the very thing they were fighting against. Catherall looked at the fading light outside the window. That is the psychology of humans. They contain both light and darkness. They are capable of terrible violence and profound compassion. And somehow, someway, most of them manage to choose the light even when the darkness would be so much easier. He turned back to Scythe. That is what makes them terrifying. An enemy of pure evil is easy to fight. You match cruelty with cruelty, but an enemy who shows you mercy, an enemy who spares your life when they could take it, an enemy who holds to principles you do not understand. He shook his head slowly. That enemy is fighting with weapons you cannot see, and you can never truly defeat them, because their greatest strength lies not in their guns or their ships or their armies. It lies in their hearts, and hearts cannot be conquered. The recorder hummed quietly as Catherall paused to drink from a cup of water. His scarred hand shook slightly. Scythe noticed but said nothing. She understood that the old veteran was walking through memories that still hurt after all these years. The first month was the worst, Catherall said. We thought we understood war. We had conquered dozens of worlds. We had faced armies with better weapons and greater numbers. But we had never faced anything like the humans of New Montana. He set down his cup and continued. The Valkyrie Command established their main base in the ruins of the largest human settlement. They brought down heavy weapons, armored vehicles, and 10,000 of their finest warriors. They expected to pacify the planet within a season. They were wrong. The humans had retreated into the wilderness. The forests were deep and dark, filled with shadows that seemed to move. The mountains were tall and cold, with caves that went down forever. The Valkyrie had better technology, better armor, better training. But the humans had something else. They had patience, and they had rage. Catherall's unit was assigned to clear the northern mountain range. Intelligence suggested that a group of human survivors had established a camp in the high valleys. The mission seemed simple. Find the camp. Destroy it. Return to base. 300 warriors began the march into the mountains. They moved in perfect formation, their weapons ready, their sensors scanning for any sign of the enemy. The first trap killed 20 of them. It was nothing sophisticated. The humans had dug a pit and covered it with branches and leaves. When the first soldiers fell in, they landed on sharpened wooden stakes. Their screams echoed off the mountain walls. Before anyone could react, gunfire erupted from the rocks above. Humans appeared on the ridgeline, firing down into the Valkyrie column. They had no armor, no energy weapons, no advanced targeting systems. They had hunting rifles and homemade explosives and an intimate knowledge of every rock and tree. The ambush lasted less than 10 minutes. When the humans retreated back into the mountains, 60 Valkyrie lay dead or dying. Catherall led the pursuit. His blood was hot with anger. These primitives had killed his soldiers with sticks and stones and ancient projectile weapons. He would find their camp and burn it to ash. They found the camp 3 days later. It was empty. The humans had known they were coming. They had packed their supplies and vanished deeper into the mountains, leaving nothing behind but cold fire pits and a message scratched into a rock. The message said, "We can do this forever." Can you? Over the following weeks, Catherall learn what the message meant. The humans never stood and fought when the odds were against them. They attacked at night, in small groups, striking fast and vanishing before the Valkyrie could respond. They poisoned water supplies. They set fires that drove wildlife into Valkyrie camps. They built traps that killed and maimed with brutal efficiency, and they never stopped. A man named Danny Holt led the human resistance in the northern mountains. Cathral never saw him clearly, but he heard stories from prisoners. Danny had been a farmer before the invasion. He had a wife and 2 children. The initial bombardment had killed them all. Now he lived only for revenge. Danny commanded 43 civilians. Farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, and children too young to shave. Against them stood 300 of the Valkyrie Dominion's elite warriors. By the end of the 2nd month, only 80 Valkyrie remained. Cathral remembered one battle above all others. His unit had cornered a group of human fighters in a narrow canyon. There was no escape. Victory seemed certain. A young woman named Maggie Burke held the canyon entrance while the others retreated through a hidden cave system. She was alone, armed with a damaged rifle and a hunting knife. Her blonde hair was matted with blood and dirt. Her left arm hung useless at her side, broken in an earlier skirmish. She held that position for 9 hours. Every time the Valkyrie advanced, she drove them back. She shot with perfect accuracy, never wasting ammunition. When her rifle jammed, she threw rocks. When they got close enough, she used her knife. 19 Valkyrie warriors died trying to pass her. At dawn, she finally fell. A plasma bolt caught her in the chest. She dropped to her knees, but did not die immediately. Cathral approached her, his weapon raised. Maggie Burke looked up at him with eyes that held no fear. "The children got away," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "That's all that matters." She died with a smile on her face. Cathral stood over her body for a long time. He thought about what he knew of this woman. Intelligence had identified her from captured records. She had been 26 years old. She had worked as a teacher in the main settlement, instructing young children in mathematics and reading. She had never fired a weapon before the invasion. This schoolteacher had killed 19 of his warriors. "What are these creatures?" one of his soldiers whispered. Cathral had no answer. The war in the mountains continued for another year. Danny Holt was eventually killed in a raid on a Valkyrie supply depot. He died with a grenade in each hand, taking 30 soldiers with him. But by then, his 43 farmers and teachers had killed over 400 Valkyrie warriors. The Valkyrie won the mountain campaign eventually. They had the numbers and the technology. But Cathral never forgot the cost. He never forgot Maggie Burke's smile or Danny Holt's message scratched into stone. The humans were not soldiers. They were something worse. They were a people who refused to accept defeat. They would fight with whatever they had, for as long as they had breath. They would trade their lives for the chance to hurt their enemies. Scythe interrupted the old veteran's story. "Why?" she asked. "Why did they fight so hard? They must have known they could not win." Cathral looked at her with his clouded eyes. "That is the question that haunted me for years," he said. "I asked a human prisoner once. He was a young man, barely grown. We had captured him after a raid. I asked him why his people fought when surrender would save so many lives." The old Valkyrie paused. He looked at me like I was stupid. Then he said something I will never forget. He said, "Some things are worth dying for. Freedom is one of them. And if we die fighting, at least our children will know we tried." Cathral shook his head slowly. "I did not understand then. I'm not sure I understand now. But I know this. A species that believes some things are worth dying for is a species that can never truly be conquered. You can kill their bodies. You can burn their cities. But you cannot kill what lives in their hearts. He looked at the recorder. That is why humans are dangerous. Not because of their weapons, because of their will. And their will is made of something harder than any armor we possess. Night had fallen over the Valkyrie homeworld. The twin moons hung low in the sky, casting pale silver light through the sanctuary windows. Scythe had ordered food brought in hours ago, but neither she nor Catherall had eaten. The story was too important to interrupt. "You have described battles," Scythe said. "You have described human psychology. But how did the war end?" "The histories say the Valkyrie Dominion accepted human terms." "That seems impossible." "We never surrender." Catherall nodded slowly. "We did not surrender," he corrected. "We accepted peace. There's a difference. But you were right to wonder. The Dominion had never lost a war. We did not lose this one either. We simply realized that winning would cost more than we could afford to pay." He began to describe the third year of the war. By then, the fighting had spread beyond New Montana. Human ships had broken through the blockade and carried word of the invasion back to Earth and the other colonies. Humanity was small compared to the Dominion, with fewer ships and less advanced technology. But they learned quickly. They adapted. They fought. The Valkyries still controlled the space above New Montana. Their fleet maintained orbital superiority, raining destruction on any human position that revealed itself. The resistance on the ground was weakening. Supplies were running low. Morale was crumbling. Then something happened that changed everything. A woman named Laura Vance led a small group of engineers who had been hiding in the abandoned mines beneath the northern mountains. They had spent 18 months working on a secret project, scavenging parts from destroyed Valkyrie equipment and combining them with human ingenuity. They built a rail cannon. It was not sophisticated. The design was based on old human technology, weapons that had been used centuries ago on Earth. The Valkyrie had never encountered anything like it because it was primitive, inefficient, and completely unpredictable. It was also capable of punching through the armor of a starship. Laura Vance was 34 years old. Before the war, she had been a mining engineer, designing equipment to extract minerals from deep underground. She had no military training. She had never built a weapon in her life. But she was brilliant. And she was angry. And she refused to accept defeat. The calculations required to hit a moving starship from the surface of a planet were staggering. The Valkyrie flagship orbited at a specific altitude and speed. The cannon's projectile would take precious seconds to reach that height. The margin of error was measured in centimeters. Laura did the math by hand. She had no computers. She had only paper, pencil, and a mind that refused to accept the impossible. On the morning of the attack, she gathered her team around the cannon. There were 11 of them, all that remained of the original 30 who had started the project. The others had died to Valkyrie patrols, to starvation, to the simple, brutal attrition of war. "This is probably going to kill us," Laura told them. "The minute we fire, every Valkyrie sensor in orbit will know our position. They'll hit us with everything they have." She looked at each of them in turn. "Anyone who wants to leave should go now. No shame, no judgment. You've all done more than anyone could ask." Nobody moved. Laura smiled. "Then let's give them something to remember us by." The flagship passed overhead at precisely the calculated moment. Laura gave the order. The cannon fired. The projectile was nothing special. Just a solid chunk of metal, accelerated to incredible speed by electromagnetic rails. It had no explosive payload. It did not need one. At that velocity, the kinetic energy alone was catastrophic. The shot punched through the flagship's hull as if it were made of paper. It continued through 3 decks, through bulkheads and compartments and corridors filled with sleeping soldiers, and struck the engine core. The explosion lit up the sky like a second sun. 3,000 Valkyrie died in an instant. The flagship broke apart, its burning fragments falling through the atmosphere like a meteor shower. The other ships in the fleet scattered in confusion, their formation broken, their confidence shattered. On the ground, the humans watched the wreckage fall, but it was what happened next that truly broke the Valkyrie will to fight. The counterattack came within hours, just as Laura had predicted. Plasma bolts rained down on the mountain, turning the mine entrance to molten slag. Laura and most of her team died in that bombardment, buried beneath tons of collapsed stone. 3 of the engineers survived. They had been positioned at a backup communications post, ready to send a message if the attack succeeded. The message was broadcast across all frequencies in all languages, reaching every Valkyrie ship and every human settlement simultaneously. A man named Chris Boyd delivered it. He was 41 years old, and he had lost both his legs in the fighting 2 years earlier. He operated communications from a wheelchair, using modified equipment that let him work despite his injuries. His voice was calm and clear as he spoke into the microphone. This is Chris Boyd, speaking on behalf of the human resistance on New Montana. As you can see, we just destroyed your flagship. We can build more cannons. We can hit more ships. We can keep doing this for as long as it takes. He paused. But we'd rather not. We're tired of war. We're tired of death. We're tired of watching our friends die and your soldiers die, and nothing getting better for anyone. His voice softened. So here's our offer. Talk to us. Sit down with us. Let's find a way to end this that doesn't involve more killing. We're not asking you to surrender. We're not asking for territory or tribute or revenge. We're just asking you to talk. Another pause. You came to our world and tried to conquer us. You killed our families. You burned our homes. And we're still willing to forgive you. We're still willing to find peace. Because that's who we are. That's who we choose to be. Chris looked directly into the camera. The question is, who do you choose to be? Warriors who fight until nothing is left? Or something better? The choice is yours. We'll be waiting for your answer. The broadcast ended. Kethril had been released from captivity by then. He stood on the bridge of a Valkyrie cruiser and watched the burning wreckage of the flagship fall through the sky. He listened to Chris Boyd's words, and he felt something he had never expected to feel. Shame. That was the turning point, he told Scythe. Not the destruction of the flagship. Not the cannon or the battle or the bodies. It was that message. Those words. He took a slow breath. We had done terrible things to them. We had invaded their world. We had killed their children. We had burned everything they loved. And after all of that, they were still willing to forgive us. They were still offering peace. His voice cracked slightly. What kind of species does that? What kind of people suffer so much and still extend a hand of mercy? We had no answer. We still have no answer. But in that moment, standing on that bridge, watching that message play, I knew something fundamental had changed. He looked at Scythe with his clouded eyes. We had come to teach humans fear. Instead, they taught us something far more powerful. They taught us that strength is not about destruction. It is about choosing mercy when you have every reason to choose revenge. He paused. That is why I say we did not lose the war. We did not surrender. We simply realized that the humans had already won in a way that had nothing to do with ships or weapons or battles. They had won because they were better than us. Not stronger. Not smarter. Just better. He shook his head slowly. And in the face of that kind of victory, there was nothing left for us to do but accept their peace and try to learn from their example. Dawn was approaching when Kethril finished his story. The twin suns were beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The recorder had been running all night, capturing every word, every pause, every tremor in the old veteran's voice. Saya sat quietly, processing everything she had heard. Her understanding of history had been shattered and rebuilt over the course of the night. The humans she had met, the kind traders and laughing diplomats and friendly exchange students, were the same species that had fought the Valkyrie Dominion to a standstill. The same species that had taught her people the meaning of mercy. "One last question," she said softly. "Looking back on everything, knowing what you know now, what would you tell your younger self?" The soldier who landed on New Montana all those years ago, expecting an easy victory? Kethro was silent for a long time. The light grew stronger outside the windows. Somewhere in the distance, morning birds began to sing. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, older, the voice of a being who had seen too much and lived too long, and had only recently begun to understand what any of it meant. "The war ended in the 3rd year," he began. "The Valkyrie High Council accepted human terms after 6 months of negotiation. I was there for the signing of the peace treaty. I watched our leaders shake hands with Katie Morrison, the same woman who had smiled into the camera and promised to fight until the last human was dead." He paused. She was older by then, thinner. Her hair had gone completely gray, and she walked with a limp from an injury she had taken in the fighting. But her eyes were the same, steady, unafraid. And when she looked at our leaders, there was no hatred in her gaze, only exhaustion and something that might have been hope. The peace terms had been remarkably gentle. The humans asked for no territory, no tribute, no reparations. They asked only for recognition as equals, a promise of non-aggression, and the return of all prisoners. "We could not understand it," Kethril admitted. "Our military commanders argued that it must be a trick. Our diplomats searched for hidden clauses. We spent weeks looking for the trap, the secret demand, the concealed revenge." He shook his head. There was nothing. The humans simply wanted peace. They wanted the killing to stop. They wanted to go back to their lives and rebuild what we had destroyed. That was all. In the decades since the war, everything had changed. Trade routes now connected Valkyrie worlds to human colonies. Cultural exchange programs brought young people from both species to study and learn and grow together. Human music played in Valkyrie markets. Valkyrie art hung in human museums. Two species that had tried to destroy each other now called themselves allies. Friends, even. Kethril had lived through all of it. He had watched the old hatreds fade. He had seen young Valkyrie and young humans laughing together, sharing meals, falling in love. He had witnessed something he once thought impossible, healing. Sam Ellis stayed in contact with me after the war, he said. "The medic who saved my life." We wrote letters for many years. When communication technology improved, we spoke face to face across the vast distances of space. He became my friend. My best friend, perhaps. His voice wavered. He died 12 years ago. Human lives are so short. I attended his funeral on Earth. I was the only Valkyrie there, surrounded by hundreds of humans who had come to honor a good man. He wiped at his clouded eyes. They welcomed me. They thanked me for coming. Sam's daughter hugged me and said her father had always spoken of me with warmth. I wept at that funeral, and I am not ashamed to admit it. Scythe waited quietly, giving the old veteran time to compose himself. "You asked what I would tell my younger self," Kethril finally said. "I have thought about that question for many years. I have imagined standing before that foolish young soldier who landed on New Montana expecting glory. And I know exactly what I would say." He looked directly at the recorder. "I would tell him this. Do not mistake kindness for weakness. The humans showed us mercy when they could have shown us revenge. They offered peace when they had every right to demand blood. That is not weakness. That is the greatest strength in the universe. he continued. I would tell him, do not mistake patience for cowardice. The humans waited. They endured. They suffered losses that would have broken any Valkyrie force. And they kept fighting, not because they loved war, but because they loved something more than war. They loved their homes, their families, their freedom. They were willing to die for those things. That is not cowardice. That is courage beyond anything we understood. His voice grew stronger, and I would tell him this above all else. Never assume that because a species appears soft, they can be broken. The humans have no armor. They have no venom. They live brief lives on a small, wet world. By every measure we valued, they should have been weak. Easy to conquer. Easy to control. He leaned forward. But they had something we did not. They had a fire inside them that could not be extinguished. They had a belief in something greater than survival. They had the capacity to love so deeply that they would fight to the death for people they had never met. And they had the wisdom to know when fighting was necessary and when it was time to heal. He sat back in his chair. Humans are the most terrifying species in the galaxy. I say this not as an insult, but as the highest compliment I know how to give. They are terrifying because they refuse to be defined by their worst moments. They are terrifying because they can burn with rage and still choose mercy. They are terrifying because they see enemies as potential friends and hate as a disease to be cured. His clouded eyes seemed to clear for a moment, focused on something far away. The Valkyrie went to war with humanity, thinking we would teach them to fear us. Instead, they taught us what true strength looks like. They taught us that the measure of a civilization is not its weapons or its conquests, but how it treats those who have wronged it. He looked at Scythe one final time. And that, young one, is why you should thank the stars every night that humans chose to be our friends. Because if they had chosen to be our enemies, truly our enemies, with all the cold determination they showed on New Montana, turned toward destruction rather than survival, there would be no Valkyrie left to tell this story. He smiled, a thin and tired smile. Go now. Share this recording with the young ones. Let them understand what their ancestors faced. Let them understand what we almost destroyed and what we were lucky enough to befriend instead. Saya stood and bowed in the traditional Valkyrie gesture of deep respect. She gathered the recorder and walked toward the door. But she paused at the threshold and turned back. Thank you, she said. For everything. Kethril nodded. Remember the lesson, he said. That is all the thanks I need. Scythe left the sanctuary as the twin suns rose fully over the horizon. Behind her, the old veteran sat alone in his chair, watching the light fill the room. He thought of Sam Ellis and Patrick Dunn and Maggie Burke and all the humans he had known, living and dead. He thought of a schoolteacher holding a canyon entrance for 9 hours. He thought of a farmer who died with grenades in his hands. He thought of a medic who saved the life of an enemy because that was simply who he was. And for the first time in many years, Kethril smiled a true smile. The humans had taught him many things. But perhaps the most important lesson was the simplest one. It is always possible to choose hope. Even after everything. Even after war and death and suffering beyond measure. It is always possible to extend a hand instead of a fist. It is always possible to build instead of destroy. That was the legacy of humanity. That was what they had given to the galaxy. And that, Kethril knew, was worth more than all the victories in all the wars in all of history.